Babe, wake up! New StarCraft 2 balance patch just dropped! That was me, literally like 45 minutes ago. I mean, she didn't really care all too much. I mean, in my defense, she had to get up for work anyways. Now, over the last couple of weeks, maybe the last couple of months, I heard a few rumors here and there about a few changes that might be happening before the end of the year. And I figured the list was going to be rather short, but look at this. It just keeps going. These are all changes to StarCraft 2 units right over here. Let's dive into it. So this was posted on December 7th. Since I live in the future, at least compared to the United States, it is already December 8th over here. Anyways, Entaro Adun, we are excited to push patch 5.0.11 to the PTR. This is the public test server where basically they temporarily publish the patch notes and, you know, theoretically people could play on that server too, but honestly, I don't think anyone really does. I'm pretty sure that the main reason why there is a PTR is because of the fact that sometimes things break. And some people will obviously give it a try. But generally speaking, the way that the game is published on the PTR is what we can expect it to be in the live game as well in a couple of, probably a couple of weeks from now. It's important to note, by the way, that the World Championships, IEM Katowice, are going to be happening over in February. So if we're going to do a new StarCraft 2 balance patch, right now would be the time. So first off, the changes for Zerg. We're starting with the Creep Tumor. Cooldown increased from 11 to 13 seconds, and the sight range is reduced from 11 to 10. Pretty significant nerf to creep, but honestly, creep in StarCraft 2, especially at the absolute highest level, it's just out of control. I mean, I don't think you realize, if you primarily play Zerg and then you decide to play some Terran and Protoss, you don't realize how blind Terran and Protoss are for the majority of the game. With Zerg, you pretty much have, well, full vision of the map for at least half of the game, and honestly, the creep is way too powerful as it is, so certainly a good nerf right there. The hatchery layer and hive, so the creep spread interval, decreased from 0.3 to 0.25. So that is specifically on the hatchery layer and the hive structures, so the buildings themselves. And then the sight range is increased from 10, 11, 12. So apparently a hatchery has less sight range. I've been playing this game for 12 years, didn't know. And the hive has a little bit more of it, so now everything is going to have a little bit more sight range. I can imagine that this is going to be primarily useful for early game cheeses, where in the past maybe you wouldn't be able to spot a structure that was coming up very close to your main hatch. Right now, you're going to be able to see it a little bit easier, which I think is pretty cool. This is a very significant one, the Viper. I have seen a lot of complaining in the YouTube comment section over the years as well about this specific ability. So they added a 0.71 second cast finish time to abduct. So cannot move or use other abilities during this time. So when the Viper comes in and it harpoons something away, it then just sort of has to, like, I don't know, review its thought process. It just hangs there for about 0.71 seconds. That is certainly a good change in my opinion. I think Vipers are a little bit too strong right now, definitely a little bit overtuned. I mean, I've mentioned the counterplay many times, but of course, especially in Zerg versus Protoss, the High Templar feedback ability. But even though realistically speaking, you should be able to get a feedback off on a Viper every time if you're a robot, in a realistic game of StarCraft 2, that doesn't happen very consistently, rather, even at the highest level. So they decided to add a cast finish time to it, which I think is reasonable. There is a chance that this is gonna make the Viper incredibly vulnerable, so maybe it's a bit much, but we'll have to see exactly how this plays out in a game, and I'm not really all too concerned about this one. This one, however, I have been asking for years. So the Ultralisk is reduced in size by 12.5%, and then we have a name right over here that is only really familiar to the map editor, the people that are, you know, editing StarCraft 2 maps and making their own custom games. The increase of the range slop from 1 to 1.4. Apparently, this is a value that you can adjust in the editor. I had never heard of it either. First off, though, the reduced size by 12.5%. This is huge. This is actually very cool. So Ultras have this weird ability to get stuck on things. They get stuck on everything. I have been suggesting for a very long time that either they would be able to walk over Zerglings, which probably would be a little bit too much, or for example, that they would just simply be a little bit smaller. And this is a pretty elegant solution, because say 12.5% is too much or it's too little, you can just adjust that value, and then obviously the unit is going to behave a little bit differently as well. I think that this is an excellent change. Ultras in general right now not very commonly used. Interestingly enough, we see them most commonly used when either Zerg is very heavily winning in a Zerg versus Terran against Bio, or against Cyclones. We see them being used against Cyclones quite a bit. which is kind of funny because Ultras, last time I checked, don't actually shoot up. Anyways, the range slop, I think this has to do with the animation reset. Let me just look up the exact specific, actually. Okay, so apparently Scarlet says that a ranged slop is the distance that a kiting unit has to run away in order to cancel an Ultralisk's attack. There you go. Hydralisks. Muscular augment move speed bonus increased from 0.71 to 1.05. That is a very significant movement speed improvement for the Hydra. Hydras in general right now in StarCraft 2, I have made jokes that they are mostly baby lurkers. I mean, that is not entirely true, but combined with some of the later changes you'll see, I'm actually pretty excited for these, because Hydras currently in StarCraft 2 are a bit of a funky unit. They used to be too strong years and years and years ago, right? When the upgrades were merged and they had like 11% or so more DPS than they have right now. This is going to make them faster, and you're going to be able to micro them a little bit better as well because of the damage point reduction over here that goes from 0.15 to 0.1. This essentially means that while Hydras will still die to things very easily, at the very least you can now move them out of a storm, for example, or a purification nova from a disruptor a little bit easier. I don't think this really affects Zerg versus Terran all too much, unless maybe you're committing with Hydras off creep a lot. Then Terrans are going to have a harder time catching them with a bunch of stimp units. But overall, I really like the idea of this change. Next up, we have the Broodlord as well as the Broodling. So the Broodlord gets a movement speed increase from 1.97 to 2.3. And then the Broodling has its duration reduced from 5.7 to 3.57. Okay, so I don't like these changes individually, but combined I think they're pretty good. So one thing we've seen over the last couple of months is Zerg players throwing Broodlings on the floor and then throwing more Broodlings on the Broodlings, and then they send wave after wave after wave of unit. Pretty cool, right? Pretty cool idea. The thing is that I'm a little concerned that over the next year or so, if we don't see any changes to that Zergs are going to be able to optimize that, and it's going to become an absolute menace. So this essentially eliminates all of that because the duration will just not allow you to get enough distance on those Broodlings to really make that worthwhile. Broodlords in general, they absolutely get destroyed, especially in Zerg versus Terran, when they come out in numbers any lower than like 20. Once we're going like 20 to 40 Broodlords can be pretty sick. But before that, they really get destroyed by both Thors and then also Ghosts. There are some changes to those units as well, more specifically the Ghost. So I like this change overall, but we'll get back to it when we're talking about the Ghost. And then the last one, the Ravager. A Ravager build time increased from 8.6 to 12.9 seconds. So that is a 4-second morph in time increase on the Ravager. This of course affects early game cheese primarily, so you do a Ravager rush, now your Ravager rush will hit 4 seconds later. That is significant, I am not sure if that was really necessary. I mean, I've seen a bunch of guys, like for example Dark, do pretty aggressive Ravager builds, but was that really a problem? I don't know. Next up, Protoss. The shield battery overcharge or recharge rate reduced from 200% to 150%. I think that's fair enough. Shield battery overcharge. It is still not one of my favorite abilities in this game. I think it's a little stupid. I understand that it's important to keep Protoss, alive, especially in the earlier stages of the game. But sometimes battery overcharge is a little ridiculous. So I think nerfing it a little bit is fine. This is an interesting one to me. So first off, I agree with this, right? Movement speed increased from 2.63 to 2.82. So the Observer will fly about 10% faster, right? Give or take. It'll be a little bit quicker. However, at the same time, the model size is increased from 17.5%. And I've been thinking about this one for a little bit. Say you're playing a Terran versus Protoss, right? And you see a little blur coming into your base. This really brings it into cloaked Banshee territory, at least in my mind. Observers aren't particularly difficult to spot as it is right now. Maybe this has to do with, like, if you go for a scan, maybe it would normally be able to, like, escape a little bit too quickly because the model size is also larger. You're not going to be able to get the unit out of that circle as... I don't know. I've got a feeling this is a little much, but fair enough. This is a big one. This is something that Protoss players over the last 12 years have asked for every day of the week. They've been begging Blizzard, guys, your voice has been heard. The Archon can now fit between single gap walls, but collision size with other units is unaffected. So right now, this especially happens in a Protoss versus Zerg. Say you're going for like you get some Archons in the later stages of the game, then suddenly there's some mutas in your main base. You decide to recall Archons to try and defend, and then you don't really pay attention because there's a million other things going on, and then you decide to go for an attack and you realize my Archons are missing, and then you see them derping around in the natural. This is a very nice quality of life improvement that, yeah, should have been in the game ages ago. High Templar movement speed increase. I already think the High Templar have a little bit too much power as it is. I mean, they're not an amazing unit, but I don't think anyone is arguing that they aren't strong enough. Anyways, High Templar, they get a little bit of a movement speed increase. I don't really feel very strongly about this one. This is a very precise value, and it's the exact same value actually as the Observer. So maybe you could go for some quick, you could go for some quick creep tumor sniping with an Observer High Templar hit squad. I think this will probably just make it so that if you're all army hotkeying, the High Templar don't trail behind as much. And obviously with feedbacking Vipers, it's gonna help out as well if the High Templar is a little bit quicker. So maybe that's the reason as to why. Don't feel very strongly about this change, but yeah, fair enough. I don't remember a lot of people asking for something like this, but maybe I'm mistaken. All right, this one is significantly more important than the High Templar movement speed. The Disruptor Purifier Orb radius has been reduced from 1.5 to 1.35. So this is a 10% reduction, right? Math in a video. Don't do it. Don't do it. Never do it. It's a significant reduction, though, on the Purifier Orb size. And that in combination with, for example, well, you see it primarily, I guess, against Protoss and then also against Terran, but in combination with some of those movement speed increases, especially to like the Hydralisk, it is going to be, yeah, quite a bit more difficult to get value out of the Disruptor, assuming the opponent is paying attention. I don't think this is really going to like remove Disruptors out of the game, but it is going to be a little bit less reliable. That's for certain. Okay, so according to Scarlet, this change was made primarily with lower league Zerg players in mind. Now, for those of you that have watched my live stream or any of my content over the last 5 years, even though I've hit Grandmaster League many times, I cannot deal with maxed out carrier armies. If you have seen me play a half-hour-long game of Zerg versus Protoss on my live stream before, you can really tell the moment at about the 12-minute mark where my mental health starts making a nosedive because I know where the game is going, okay? I know where the game is going because at some point, even though I will try and stay alive, even though I will harass to the best of my abilities, at some point, the carrier fleet is gonna A-move through the center of the map, and it will destroy literally everything. The problem is that at the absolute highest level of play, Zerg versus Protoss late game is Zerg favored. If you see guys like Serral, if you see, you know what I'm talking about, right? Those top level players are incredibly good against Skytals because it seems like they have like 3 arms with like, you know, Infestors and Vipers and Corruptors and Spore Crawlers and like all of those units are being microed really well. And as long as all of those units are microed really well, Zerg is actually favored in the late game. From what I understand, this is a change primarily made for lower league players, aka everybody below like the top 50 Zerg, and I appreciate it. I very much so appreciate it. So, Interceptor shield reduced from 40 to 30. Interceptor attack target priority reduced from 20 to 19. And the Interceptor flying radius around the target is increased as well. This means that theoretically speaking, you should be able to counter carriers a little bit easier. That's nice. I like that a lot. There's still going to be a force to be reckoned with, but you're not going to be able to just sit there and max out on carriers as easily anymore. You'll definitely have to be a little bit smarter about things. Although it's, you know, these values are relatively small. So Interceptors, by the way, have 40 shields and 40 HP right now for 15 minerals. So that's 80 health for 15 minerals. Anyways, it's going to take a little bit of experimentation to figure out exactly how this lines up in game. But I certainly like the idea of making carriers less of an attack movie type of army. The Sentry, the build time reduced from 26, or 26, that's what we call that number, Loco, to 22.9. So this is obviously for the warp in time, it doesn't really matter all too much, but this means that the Sentry will come out a little bit earlier if you wanted to. Sentries in general, not very popular right now. We don't see them that much. I mean, you kind of need them for the Guardian Shield and a couple of Force Fields from time to time. but I definitely like the idea of making that unit ever so slightly more powerful. The last set of changes, however, is a pretty big one. So, Forge upgrades, level 1 upgrades, level 2 upgrades, and level 3 upgrades, all of the research time on those has been reduced by 7, 9, and 11 seconds. We've already seen some of those really cool builds lately, where Protoss players are rushing out a second Forge, and then they start chrono boosting the hell out of those structures. You can now get those upgrades out quite a bit quicker, and obviously, since usually timing attacks in StarCraft 2 are dependent on upgrades finishing up, you're gonna be able to hit quite a bit sooner as well. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to play out. This may very well make 2 base and probably mostly 3 base pushes significantly more powerful from Protoss, and I've got a feeling that it may very well create a couple of new all-ins, or at least old all-ins that we haven't seen in quite some time. So I like it. I think a lot of Protoss players are gonna start experimenting with double Forge again, which I'm all for. And then the changes to the Terran. First off, we have the Ghost. Enhanced Shockwaves, the upgrade has been removed. This is always a funny upgrade to me, because it's one of those upgrades that you get no matter what. There's really no reason to not get Enhanced Shockwaves, because it's really, really good. So this increases the radius of the EMP. What they're doing now, however, is they're making the EMP radius by default a little bit bigger. So Enhanced Shockwaves brings it from 1.5 to, I believe, 2, and they're basically meeting it halfway. So the base EMP radius is increased right now, and you don't have to spend any resources on the Enhanced Shockwaves, meaning that you can get an extra Ghost. And then we have Steady Targeting as well. Steady Targeting, that's the snipe ability. It's cancelled if the target moves more than 13.5 range away from the Ghost while casting, and the cast range is 10. So I wonder how this works out in combination with, for example, the Broodlord buff that we saw with the movement speed. If a Ghost starts casting the snipe ability at the maximum range and then the Broodlord simply backs up. I'm assuming, since it takes a second and a half to finish its channel, that the Broodlord is probably far away enough? Maybe not. It's gonna be very close. I mean, realistically speaking, you'll probably still get it off because Zerg is not likely to be looking there, and you're not likely to actually be casting at the absolute maximum range either. But this certainly has very significant balance implications, especially for Zerg versus Terran. Overall, though, I think this is a good set of changes because the Ghost right now, at least in my humble Zerg opinion, the Ghost is way too well-rounded, right? The thing is, though, and we'll get to that in a moment, the power that the Ghost currently has, and that is being somewhat reduced here, it's not shifted anywhere else. So, a little concerned for that. Anyways, next up we have the Banshee. Hyperflight Rotor's upgrade time reduced from 121 to 100 seconds. That is the Banshee speed improvement. And then the Hyperflight Rotor's cost has also been reduced. I'm a big fan of this. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to see more Hyperflight Rotor play in general. I mean, we've seen some players mess around with it. Euthermal, obviously. I've seen Maru play it a bunch in the past too. I've seen Beyond go for it too. But honestly, it's one of the most underused upgrades in the game. And I would like to see more of it, so I think it's an excellent idea. The Cyclone Mag Field Accelerator damage bonus changed from plus 20 versus Armored to plus 10 versus all. So right now, Cyclones are a bit of a gimmicky unit. You make maybe 1 or 2 of them in the earlier stages of the game, and sometimes we see them as part of Battle Mech, but Battle Mech right now, not very popular at all. I like to see a change to the Cyclone, and I think this is definitely a good start. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, but I can imagine that the Cyclone now is going to be quite a bit more valuable. And you might even be able to make a mid-game army built around the Cyclone, which would be really sick. Sensor Tower range reduction by 10% from 30 to 27. Fair enough. Sensor Towers in StarCraft 2 are, of course, amazing. Maybe a little bit too strong. This will make them slightly less strong. Fair enough. And then we have a rework to the Raven. So Ravens, we see them from time to time in Terran versus Protoss. We barely ever see them in Terran versus Zerg. Terran versus Terran, however, is all about the Raven. And in that matchup, it can be quite obnoxious. So we have a complete rework. Now, these first 3, I had a look at these 3 when I looked at this bullet point list first, right? And it says gas cost reduced from 200 to 150, build time reduced by 13 seconds, and then the starting energy is increased as well. So I was like, oh my god, that's ridiculous. What else does it have, though? Interference Matrix, that is the interference matrix. It's what temporarily stuns a unit and prevents it from doing stuff. The duration has been reduced from 11 to 8 seconds, okay? Anti-armor missile, armor reduction reduced from 3 to 2, okay? Corvid reactor upgrade removed, okay? So this is the energy improvement, the starting energy for the Raven. So they basically now get that starting energy baked in. And then the auto turret energy cost increased from 50 to 75. So this is specifically done to address the Terran versus Terran meta. I know a lot of Terran players are not a big fan of the stalemate scenarios that you can get into and the amount of value that the Raven can really provide. This is going to make it, yeah, slightly less strong. But I do think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. So you can still spawn... Yeah, you can still spawn a Raven with enough auto turret energy, but you're not going to be able to just spam a ton of auto turrets in the later stage of the game. At the very least, you can't pull that off as easily, which seems reasonable. Okay, so what exactly do we have? We've got a Zerg nerf to creep tumors. Small buff right over here. Viper late game reduction, so the Viper is not going to be as powerful. Ultras and Broodlords, however, are going to be more powerful. Hydras also more powerful. Broodlings, not as scary anymore, but I think in combination with the Broodlord, that one is fine. Early game cheese is going to be addressed, though, with that Ravager, because apparently that was a little bit too strong. Although, again, I have not really heard a lot of people complain about this one. Either way, I like these changes for Zerg a lot. A lot of people are talking about significant buffs to the late game. And I do think that the Ultra and the Broodlord buffs are quite nice. But Ultras and Broodlords, we don't see them that often. Like, we see Broodlords more so than Ultras. I've always kind of felt like Ultras and Broodlords should have been the ultimate late-game Zerg army. But realistically, it's really that Infestor, Viper, Queen, lurker-based army that we most often see in the late game, and then with a lot of static defense and all that too. I like the idea of shifting some of that power to the Ultralisk and the Broodlord, just because I think they're cool, and I don't think that any of these values are too absurd. For Protoss, shield battery nerf, observer buff, I guess. Still not entirely sure about that one. Archon is a very nice quality of life improvement. High Templar movement speed is an indirect buff, I think, to... Maybe that's actually a direct buff. I thought this was maybe just for mid-game play before I started this video anyways. But now that I'm thinking about it a little bit more, I think it's a nice idea specifically against, you know, for example, Vipers, right? In the late game, and other units that may very well need to get feedback, right? Maybe even Ravens are going to need to be feedback now. I don't know. Disruptor is going to be slightly weaker. Carriers are going to be slightly easier to kill. But we do have some more timing attack potential right here with the Forge. And I guess the Sentry too. You can, yeah, hit the opponent in the face with some sharp timings a little bit easier. So some late game improvements for Zerg overall, other than the Viper, and then some mid game improvements right here for Protoss, while slightly reducing the late game effectiveness. This one maybe being a little bit more than just slightly. So for Terran, the late game is being nerfed, while the early game and mid game are being buffed. So my main concern with this one is late game Zerg versus Terran, because we all have seen those top level Zerg players doing incredibly well, you know, overall at every stage in the game. And they're already really quite dominant in the late game of Zerg versus Terran as it is. Right now we get into a lot of those stalemate scenarios. Maybe that Broodling change can make that, it's not going to make up for all of this though. Yeah, that's my main concern with this patch. Okay, now I haven't actually looked at these just yet. Ooh, there's a long list. Okay, let's have a quick little look. Miscellaneous bug fixes and quality of life changes. So all units follow acquire range reduced from 5 to 2. That means the units will switch to attacking from moving when within this range of the follow target. Okay. I guess this could affect early game cheeses. We'll have to see how that plays out. Dark Templar attack blink delay reduced from 0.75 to 0.71. Standardized numbers on normal game speed. Okay, fair enough. Factory increased maximum spawn radius by 1. Okay, so I guess units can pop out of the factory a little bit easier. The Widowmine reduced random unburrow / burrow delay from 0.3 seconds or 0.36 seconds to 0.18 seconds. The average time remains the same. Okay. And no longer targets Zerg eggs without a manual order. Okay, so this is actually quite nice. This doesn't really happen at the pro level, but I have seen a lot of Widowmine drops against Zerg where, yeah, the Widowmine decides to attach to the eggs rather than any of the drones that you really want to kill. So at the pro level, the pro players will just simply target the juiciest clump of drones, but this will at the very least make it a little bit easier for everybody below that level. Fair enough. The Cyclone fixed an issue where lock-on could enter cooldown while the Cyclone is loaded into a medevac. Okay, and lock-on no longer targets Zerg eggs without a manual order. Fair enough. The shield battery fixed an issue where repeatedly issuing a stop command could increase the shield regen rate. Okay, that seems like a good fix, yes. The Adept fixed an issue where Adepts could not be ordered to cancel the shade ability when selected with Adepts who are not finished warping in. Yes, I've run into that problem. And then can now be ordered to load into a prism while shading, automatically canceling the shade. Cool, nice. We have the Queen fix an issue where initial creep tumors could be cancelled. And no longer unable to receive certain orders for 0.6 seconds after spawning. That was a bug? Because I remember selecting queens and then adding them to a control group and then somehow nothing happened. Fair enough. Like that idea a lot. The Lurker. Attacks will no longer be blocked by certain low ground terrain features. Fair. Orbital Command fixed an issue where a mule could be cast targeting refineries close to command centers. Okay, didn't know that. Hydralisk fixed an issue where Hydralisks attacked faster at melee range. Fixed an issue where Morph to Lurker would be cancelled with a smart command issued immediately after the Morph command. Okay, fair enough. Stasis Ward. Attack target priority increased from 10 to 20. Fair enough. Units affected by stasis can be issued any non-build commands instead of only move commands to be acted upon stasis expiring. Oh, okay. That's actually kind of cool. Fair enough. So this will make them a lot more targetable, right? This will make it so that, especially like, I don't know, units that are standing around will actually try to deny the stasis ward. Cool. We have the Raven, fix an issue where units affected by interference matrix could not be issued stop commands, and fix an issue where units affected by interference matrix would walk forward below their attack range when given attack move commands. Okay. Fixed a visual bug on the Nidus Worm introduced in the previous patch, the Nidus creep behavior. Fixed an issue where Mutalisks attack launch, the sound that is, would play each time the attack bounced. Fixed an issue where Zerglings could not receive queued morph to Baneling commands. That's also a bug. Okay. That has been in the game for forever. Like, as long as Banelings have been around for, which is the alpha of Wings of Liberty. Fair enough. Zerglings and Swarm Hosts. Fixed an issue where Zerglings and Swarm Hosts could not be given commands while unburrowing. Okay. Fix an issue where morph... Oh, yeah. Sometimes you have to really, like... excuse me. You have to, like, really spam the ability. That is true. Like, sometimes you have to really, like, spam right-click. I guess they will be a little bit more reliable. The Roach fixed an issue where morph to Ravager would be cancelled with a smart command issued immediately after the morph command. Okay. Fix an issue where the Liberators could not be given certain orders immediately after being ordered to unsiege. Yes. That is also something I've noticed. Didn't realize it was considered a bug. I guess some of these are quality of life improvements, right? Yeah. So they're not necessarily all bug fixes. They're quality of life improvements. So some of that behavior that we've had in this list, it's been intended. But anyways, the Worker unit no longer needs to wait for full deceleration before beginning to attack. Okay. So that could actually affect early game cheeses. Especially in like the Zerg versus Terran matchup, you pull drones quite frequently against early game barracks rushes. Especially against Marines with bunkers and all that. And then the steady targeting snipe on the Ghost can now be manually cancelled. That is really neat as well. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So I didn't expect us to get such a significant set of changes to StarCraft 2 at this point in StarCraft 2's lifespan. But I gotta say, I'm excited for pretty much all of this. My main concern, I suppose, is that there is a chance that late-game Zerg is a little bit overtuned compared to where Terran and Protoss are at with this list of changes. But it's way too early to really tell. As always, I'll leave a link to this list of changes down below in the description of this video as well, and I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on it. Please let me know down below in the comment section of this video.